Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Coffee with Captain Miles of Pride of Baltimore 2. Behind the camera is Chief Mate Jeff Crosby. Today is Friday, July 10, and we have a tropical depression off the mid-Atlantic, actually almost right off of Ocean City, Maryland. Tropical Storm Faye, headed north. It's going to bother the Jersey coast and Long Island. So, commiserations, everyone. At the moment, Baltimore is rain-free, but the eastern shore is getting deluged. So we're just outside of the reach of Faye at the moment.
At the moment. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well, and thanks for joining us this morning. What have we been up to, Captain Miles? Now that we're back to work, done vacationing.
Yeah, done vacationing. What did we do for vacation? Not a thing. We were being very diligent. Stayed right where we lived. But since Jeff and I have been back, we've been getting into some things that we don't and been thinking about for a long time. For instance, I've been going through the log history that we have. Not so much the history, but just putting them in order. We have more than 3 decades of logs for Pride of Baltimore 2. And the deck log has been collected all these years. So a book of it, it's almost a day a page. Sometimes it's more than 1 day per page. So if you put 32 years together, they've got a lot of stuff that's just been stuffed into a file cabinet. So those of you who have been Pride crew and know the story of the file cabinet and container number 3, you might find it amusing that Jeff took time to put them in boxes and get them into the air-conditioned section of our facility here where we're at right now, the lunchroom, so to speak. And I've been getting them in chronological order in decades and also setting aside for further review all those data sheets that came out of the engine room.
Yeah.
It's like 6 feet of data sheets if you were to pile them up. It's more like 4 feet. But the point is we got a lot of stuff to go through. Jeff, in the meantime, has been sorting out the... well, you tell us.
Yeah, so I've been kind of flipping back and forth between getting into maintenance projects and then also cleaning and organizing some of our shipping containers where we keep our tools and supplies and things of that nature. As it is with any time that the crew goes away, you hope for the best that everything's going to be put away and organized, but there's always a little bit of last minute chaos that happens. So there's some disorder that I'm sorting through there. So Captain Miles, the topic this morning is crew training and seamanship. So let's start with the crew training aspect of that question, and we'll kind of morph into seamanship. When it comes to Pride, we ask for prior experience on boats, on sailboats, on tall ships before applying as a deckhand. Why is that?
Yeah, well, the professional marine community has a lot of sectors to it. And that's easily forgotten about. We think of the big commercial deep sea boats and to be a mariner on them, and then when you get in closer to it and take a look, it's a very different world than it would be for a sailboat. That's pretty easy to understand, but between sailboats, it's also very different between what is the more education or school or training, sail training, public introduction to the adventurous sea versus the business of being a professional yacht crew. It's a different culture. The genesis of folks that come into our community with these ships, school ships, sail training ships, day exercise boats like here in Maryland, the Sultan and the Lady Maryland and the Sigsbee, almost to a person, they're coming to the water with an interest to be professional after high school. They've not been with the water hardly at all, at least not in any constructive way, until after high school and sometimes deep into college. In the yachting side, It's yacht club experience starting from nearly infant size. And so there's it is typically race oriented. And so and it's modern material and construction and design rather than what we're dealing with these heavier, less efficient vessels with the means of sharing the experience rather than sort of going for competition.
Yeah.
So the cultural side is a critical aspect, while at the same time nomenclature. So the number of yacht folks that come to Pride and are trying to figure out the gaff sail is a real education. It's a real eye-opener to the cultural contextual difference. These are very good sailors. Very good sailors. You could argue that they're better sailors in terms of the physics and the knowledge of the wind and the sail and the trim than our community starts with and develops until quite late in the game because of that youthful experience that's been going on. So, but it's still a geometry thing. It's a nomenclature thing. It's among other things. So we do not hire from anywhere else except our community. Spread across the country is probably a pool of between 3,000 and 5,000 people. And when most of the universe of vessels that fill that community, by far, more than half, could be more than 3/4, are seasonal operations. And so there's a fairly significant hiring process that happens in the wintertime, ready for and late and early spring, ready to get boats ready that are tying up during the wintertime. And we're part of that community. So there's a big rush for people within the community. And we're looking for people who are interested in expanding their experience, having already drunk the Kool-Aid, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to show proof to this cultural difference. We get next to no applications from yacht-oriented background. So there's a lot of work to be done in yachting, but we're not getting applications from that background. So I think that there's proof evidence of a significant difference. And when what yacht folks have come to us, sometimes it's a struggle figuring out the community on board Pride. When we see someone who's very interested in the traditional but comes from only the modern background, we're very cautious about saying yes. And we have a lot of conversation about, do they have a notion as to what's going to be like? And when we think we still want that person, we've observed that it's in that first 4-week period, they come close to saying, I'm sorry, I'm done. You guys are weird. I'm out of here.
You guys are weird and I can't get away.
But those who stick it out, and there's been, say, in 3 decades that I can more recently remember, I would say for the second Pride of Baltimore, if there's been 10 yacht-oriented background people who've come aboard and stuck it out, they've been great additions to the crew of the Pride. And they've gone on in both sides of the community. They've hopped back and forth. And they've been really good in terms of the yachting side and also the traditional working class side. So that's our start point. And it's a long-winded way to get to the fact that we only go to a pool that sort of knows the ropes.
Yeah, sure. So from a crew training aspect, there's already the element of culture and a general understanding of these boats before we even get into Pride-specific crew training. So let's kind of move into that. So what kind of training do we do on board Pride for a deckhand, for a cook, for an engineer, for a bosun, for a mate? What are some similarities with that, and then what are some differences, depending on job?
Well, the whole marine world starts with ship familiarization, and that is a multitude of factors, very specific as well as very general. So what's the mission of the vessel? What do we expect of them in terms of behavior? every vessel has nuances about the way they expect their what they want for behavior, what they want for interaction. But then there is, where is what?
Yeah.
So talk about fire extinguishers. Talk about light switches. On boats, they can be pretty mysterious places.
Yeah, decades of moving lights around.
If we have watertight doors, what's that policy? What is our general safety boat check process? What is the routine for time off? When we can have it? What's the watch system? What's in the case of Pride, with a larger crew and a pretty structured command system, you've got a captain, got a first mate, chief mate, got a second mate, got a watch leading bosun. We have department leaders in the sense of the engineer, who plays the role of a deckhand. The cook is part of the emergency response system, so there's the business of how that interacts, and so if a cook is unfamiliar with that, and then every once in a while we see someone who's been a cook but has not been in the emergency response system, how that can be a bit of a learning curve. So we start with the business of how do you live aboard the boat, where is everything on the boat, how do we operate in terms of communication, terms of day-to-day meal cycles. And in the spring, when we're coming out of winter fit, that's sort of a number of conversations. Sometimes for efficiency reasons, we'll do it at a meal time. We'll spend but there's always a time when we'll take an hour, maybe an hour and a half, maybe even a whole morning. We'll go through the Crew Handbook. And
what's in the Crew Handbook?
Yeah, what's in the Crew Handbook? It talks about the watch system. It talks about the mission. It defines the office side of the company in terms of who is what positions there are, and what their responsibilities. It describes the board of directors in a general degree. The mission is also somewhat encapsulated. The sense of what is our individual responsibility. We break it. Some of this is sort of a sports-related, let's be all one team language, trying to get people to recognize that our ethos is what our ethos is. And it's not about comparing Pride to other boats. It's about getting people to come to a strange boat to them with their expectations, because they've taken the effort to come here. It's a competitive scenario. We might be getting 3 applications per position in any given season. So there's the stress of that from their perspective, their ambition. And then we're trying to take that ambition and take that hopefulness and try to get them to become more this family, more this sense of a goal of a team. I mean, how many members in a football team, and how do you get them all to sort of, in their minds, go in the same direction, knowing that each one's going to be playing a specifically different role. And so and yet they're mature, and they've been on other vessels, and the other vessels are good operations, and so there's this business of adjusting to different ships, different long splices. We see that as an old phrase from way back, but it can be like they're proud of their first boat, and maybe they're coming from a first boat. Maybe they've done 2-3 seasons on a first boat, but still their first boat. Now Pride's number 2. It's like, whoa, you're telling me I'm not doing it right? There's this tension that goes in, and no, it's not about you not doing it right. It's about you understanding, we've been in this business for a long time. The boat's 30 years old. Are you going to tell us we should be doing it differently? So let's smell the coffee and understand that it's this coffee, not that coffee.
Yeah.
So you can always go back there.
You enjoy that coffee more than this coffee. Yeah.
So we have a lot of introduction. It's introduction after introduction after introduction. And the first time we do any one thing that's physical, it's take a whipping, take a splice, take a rove off a line for a sheet or a halyard. at first it's sort of like obvious, right? Well, not necessarily. So we have records, we have descriptions. We say, look, ask the question, don't assume. Now everyone's coming with some really good sensitivities that are very helpful for safety. Heavy loads. The business of managing a load is generally known. However, we have a couple of interesting tools. We have this thing we call the crank call.
Yeah.
And it's basically like a winch drum that's on a modern boat, but it's a side-oriented one.
Yeah.
Not a vertical one. And so you wrap things around. And with heavy loads, we can take 2, 3, 4 wraps, and then we'll crank it up, and then we'll say we need to ease it off. It is interesting to realize that in the world of traditional ships, these things hardly exist.
Yeah.
So when you want to ease a line off of a drum under load, you just want to lower it slowly, whatever that load is. It's not visible to you. You just have to watch it going around the drum. There's a point with which too much friction means that you're actually you're pushing line rather than the load overcoming the friction and sliding around the drum. And if that is not understood, that is a great way to have a real tragedy, because the pushing of the line means a wrap is going up outside of diameter of the winch, the drum, and there's a risk that it'll somehow slide out and are off the drum, reducing the friction to the point there's a big jump. And that can create a centrifugal force which will unwrap everything. And then you've got a runaway. And you might have the person going through the winch drum as well, along with everything else happening from above coming down. That can be a real shock and awe experience of all this care about going around a belaying pin. Easing a load all around is well known. It's understood from boat to boat to boat. Generally speaking, also from a cleat, but not nearly as familiar when it comes to a business of a drum like a winch that you take wrapped, and you have to sometimes say be belabored about this concern, and it takes a little experience. It's not something you read a book, understand, snap. So that can be pretty unique. And then it's just every evolution, every first thing, it's like pull the group together and talk about it.
Yeah.
How about your experience? What's your side of that?
Yeah, I mean that rings true with my experience. Kind of one thing that I find kind of interesting about the whole process of crew training is that initial couple months of getting everybody together and kind of figuring out where people are at and where people have really grown and what areas people kind of need some work on, and also what areas they're interested in. One thing that we have on board Pride is kind of ancillary duties. We have ship's carpenter, we have a couple of different organizational areas, the keeper of the laths, the purser, and it also just, people's general interest. They want to learn more about bosunry, or they want to learn more about engineering, because those are all elements of making these boats function and maintaining these boats. So kind of figuring out where everybody's at and what they're really interested in and passionate in can really kind of help with the whole getting people trained is using their interests to kind of point them and encourage them is also oftentimes kind of a really kind of fun challenge. What's some of the differences between training a deckhand to Pride versus training a mate to Pride? Well, what's that gulf like?
The officers have responsibilities of leadership, and it can be divided into sections of ship requirements. So regulatorily speaking, we'll have someone who keeps track of the business of the safety gear. So in our vessel, Pride, that falls to the second mate. The mate is a pathway for the captain and the mate to decide the physical preparation of the vessel. And so that pathway will then go to the bosun. And so a priority agreement with the mate and the captain will lead to the mate setting specific tasks out through the bosun, and that will bring the hands together to get it clear, and then the bosun proceed forward. Or maybe the bosun, because of skill set, will be individual. So then we have the business of communication. So a hand might be curious about a personal issue. So where do they go with that personal question? And it could be simple as, can I take some personal time because I got something I got to do? So that has been described in a general way during the introduction, but the officers are often the individuals who will be approached. Now, the captain's not unapproachable, at least in the structure. Now,
you throw in personalities, and that's a whole different game.
Yeah. Ooh, I don't want to talk to the captain. Or I don't want to talk to the mate. I want to talk to the captain, so we can go all over the place.
Yeah.
And of course, timing with the captains. Like I've sometimes found myself saying, "Look, if I got a coffee cup in my hand, it's probably okay to approach me." But if I don't, that's a risky thing. You might want to find things out.
That's fair.
The officers have a gray area that's pretty wide about when their authority is the answer and when they need to take the situation and consult the captain about their judgment of a given situation. And it's so underway. We do watch and watch around when we're transiting between ports, because it's always more than a day. The business of recognizing that consultancy process aboard Pride. Not all ships work this way. Most of them do, whereby, okay, we've got the status quo, we know the course, we know the wind, we know the sail configuration, we know the traffic situation, we know what our intentions are over the given period of time that the watch leader is going to be in that role of being the leader. But then something's shifting, whether it's a traffic scenario, whether it's a wind scenario, whether it's and that means a speed scenario. It's a weather sign way off on the horizon. That triggers the mind of the watch leader. Then comes this point with which, when does the watch leader consult with the captain? And the demand on Pride of Baltimore is if you think something needs to be done, you need to start the consultation.
Right.
And it's not, what do I want to do? It's not, it's changing, what do I do? It's, you got a solution? Come talk about the solution, the recommendation with the captain. And that is that bridge resource management equation that the whole world of transportation is dealing with at different levels. The airplane business was the interrelationship between the pilot and the co-pilot, and that's communication. It's about a conversation, because you've got two pairs of eyes, two brains, two sets of ears that are calculating all the time. So let's get them to interrelate. Well, in the case of bridge resource management, which is what it's called in the marine business, it's about communication. And it doesn't mean that the captain is on deck. It's whenever the captain is, whether the captain is asleep or not. It is, hey, Cap, we've got this situation going on. I think we ought to do it this way. What would you like? Or maybe there's 2 or 3 ways of doing it. That can always get to be an interesting conversation. So that means timeliness. So that's this gray area where the young watch leader or the relatively practiced watch leader is now having to adjust to the culture.
Yeah.
And maybe they've been in a scenario where it isn't this way. So now that can take a little getting used to. But once it's gotten used to, then they're more comfortable with the procedures and the expectations, and the captain's very satisfied with the fact that that whole process is being met in that manner. That is the way the captain would like to see it done in terms of communication. It's a great teaching moment. See, pride is fairly unique, and so a simple schooner but powerful, take a Harvey Gamage versus a Pride of Baltimore. There's a lot there that may not come to the watch leader's mind from a past experience with the different boat. And that's where this business of the teaching moment, because your professional development is quite often the business of a different vessel and how different it is. So for then you get the scenario being dockside. Our mission is a dockside mission. It's not an underway mission.
Right.
So we're about exposing the story that we represent, both a historical one and a modern introductory one, ambassadorial one. So that's crew management in a very direct sort of way. It's you have maybe half the crew involved with deck tours. The other half have the time off. At some point, the captain's going to bow out as well. So that whole business of crowd management, the whole business of being able to say, this is the way we're going to do it because this is the way the captain wants it done. The mission relates. We talked about this in terms of the mission, but then there's something that falls a little bit out of that. So today's world, we have cell phones, and it can be a little bit of a sort of an albatross around the neck of the watch leader, because 40 years ago we didn't have these cell phones, so you had to cope. Captain's not here. I got to do this.
Yeah.
So there's this question about communication and if the captain's on time off, then why bother him? That's
right.
Another question. So how do you deal with that? And this goes back to the business of communication and being ahead of the game in terms of a question. Make no assumption, because the moment you're wondering about the answer, that's an assuming trend, and that's where the communication should happen. Let's talk about this. What might be the way to handle this? Yeah. And over time, it becomes less of a question because of that familiarity. So those first 2 months, we've been laid up for the winter. We've now got a new crew. We haven't even gone sailing. All we've done is put the boat together.
Yeah, take the cover off, put sticks up in the air. Yeah.
And that's a complicated, detail-oriented thing, and now we're going sailing. And so it's like wide-eyed, like, wow, is that how that works? That's the first time the foresail gets set. For those who've never seen the loose-footed foresail get set from a brailed position and a standing gaff position, if it's a slightly breezy day, it can be a little bit, oh, wow, that's how that works. I mean, you intellectually understand how it works, so we sort of walked it through, but it can still be like, wow.
Yeah, and, the pressure and the power involved is quite impressive.
Because it snaps out kind of like the way a spinnaker might snap out under certain circumstances when it's all tied up, and then
the difference being when you launch a spinnaker, you don't have 4 or 5 people holding onto the line.
Mm-hmm.
Adds a whole different element.
Yeah, remember to let go.
Yeah, that's right. We're gonna go for a pretty wet ride.
Right.
So kind of shifting the gears a little bit here, we've talked about some crew training. Let's kind of shift more into seamanship. Is seamanship, boat seamanship, is it all the same, or are there differences?
Well, there's always to use a very loose analogy, you buy a car new to you, it takes a little while to get familiar with it.
Yeah.
If it's a different car, and so a different year of the same model, the same thing happens. So yes, there's plenty to get used to when it comes to the applicable decisions that might be best decisions as against less best, but not wrong. So that's where it gets to be kind of interesting. Is this okay? It worked, but we went through a lot of effort, and it could be a lot simpler. Or the other way around, we went and did this quickly, and it didn't work out very well. And there's everything in between. So a single engine screw, a twin engine, a single engine ship with one propeller in the center, a twin engine ship with two propellers, one either side, or a single engine, single propeller, but it's not in the center.
Offset prep, yeah.
So there's going to be disciplines that are useful to one that may not be useful to another. When I say disciplines, recognition of character of response, and then under sail, we have in a general sailing configuration of a 10-knot day, true wind day, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sails.
I feel like that'd be a number you'd have off the top of your head.
8 sails.
Yeah.
You know, the Harvey Gamble is a great boat, but she has 4, maybe 5. So what does that mean to the decision making? Where do you start? Now, Harvey Gamage is a classic schooner, is a boomed foresail. We have a loose-footed foresail. She has a club staysail, club boom staysail. We have a loose-footed staysail. What does that mean from the point of view of crew involvement, and what is timing and what is balance? The sailboats are about balance. And when you're doing day sail operations, quite often the tradition is mainsail, then foresail, then headsails when you're at an anchor. But that wouldn't be workable on a loose-footed sail vessel. You can't set the foresail when you're at anchor, getting ready to sail away, because of the loose-footed nature of it. It just doesn't. It's not applicable to having good control of the situation.
Yeah.
So the whole business of how the vessel will twist and how you get her to twist is going to be different on Pride than might be to a classic American schooner with a boom main, a boom foresail, with or without a loose-footed staysail. And with no square topsail, you got the square topsail. So seamanship is understanding the characteristics of the vessel because of the way it's laid out. Then you get into a force situation and wind seaside situations. So from my perspective, my knowledge of the boat is developed, starts, well, at least on this vessel, since she was built, since she was sailing in October of 1988, and so that accumulation of knowledge, my instincts are so ingrained that it's almost difficult to describe why I do things.
Sure.
Because it's sort of like, why is there air? To blow up basketballs. I mean, what's the question for?
This is so obvious.
So I have to think about the answer because it is so ingrained in me that then there's this long conversation about the why and the how and the cascade of steps that one decision can require just to get there, or are going to quickly need to happen thereafter, depending upon the scenario. So schooners and ketches and yawls, they all have a configuration where keeping the sail plan in the center is beneficial to the steering control of the ship. Because if you only have the mainsail and the foresail up, what's the boat going to do? So you have to ease the main out a lot in that scenario to keep her from overpowering the rudder.
Yeah. And
with rake, we've got 15 and a half degrees of rake in the main. That boom's not going out in a 10-knot true wind day. That means the boat's going to round up like a weather vane. That means the rudder's going to be overpowered. So wake up. Hello, yoo-hoo. You're going to lose control. So maybe you don't set the main. Oh, you don't set the main?
Right, but you got to put everything out.
And you got a loose-footed foresail? You're not going to set that? What are we going to do when we lift that anchor up? There's a process. And that's getting to know the boat. And that's getting to know the boat and understanding options. And as you get to know the boat better and better and better, and you have a responsive crew because now they're familiar with the boat, and it takes a while. They've been on the boat for 2 months. Now we go sailing. So it's going to be another month or more before they're going to be sort of, yeah, I know what I'm doing. When I hear that call, I know where to go. But it's going to take a moment at first, and then after a while it stops being a moment, and then it's like, go to it. And so that's when you can start to thin down the margins of caution for the issue of control, your sense of certainty to establish the outcome you're going for as you're going with the balance under sail. Now under power, turn the keys, push the button, fix it, say we didn't do that very well. And of course there are those who say, well, you shouldn't really depend on those things. As well, we do a lot of maintenance on them.
They're quite dependable.
So it's so seamanship, understanding the grand power that's there, because it's uncommon in a boat the size of Pride in the configuration that the Pride's rig is. There is some very powerful schooners of a similar size. You talk about the ocean-going boats out of SEA. They're powerful boats. They can stand up to their sail plan very well. Pride stands up to hers, but it's a different scenario, and your threshold for acceptance about pressure is going to be different between the boats. But they have a balance thing they have to respect, otherwise you're just not going to have control. And so one of their beauties is that they have the main staysail and the forestaysail. They don't have to have anything else. And that's a balanced configuration. It's absolutely wondrous at sea, in whether it's moderate or strong, because of their ocean work, they're trying to go slow sometimes.
Yeah. And
they can do that under sail. And you get a Greyhound like Pride, it's a little difficult sometimes.
Slow it down. Stop moving. Yeah, I can remember a couple of times where we were hove to, still doing 3 or 4 knots.
Yeah, heaving to in this boat is because of the extreme drag, a relatively extreme drag, which is the angle of the keel from the bow to the stern as it gets deeper back aft. Those vessels that are less drag, they're going to be less able to spin on their hull. So you get this rig which has got a dominant sail in the back of the boat. With Pride, it's a trend that's very slow, but sometimes you can lose control of that spin, and then she'll tack on you.
Yeah.
That's not happening at a sea condition. That's happening in light air.
Yeah.
Less than 10 knots, 6 to 8 knots. You're killing time. You're in a smooth lake water, or even off the East Coast when you've got an offshore breeze and you're close to shore and there's no sea at all, and you're just just waiting, but you don't want to take sail down only to set it back up again.
Yeah.
So you do this trick where you got all these sails up and you're trying to figure out how to set it so nobody has to touch the rudder. They can just watch what's happening. And every once in a while, you think you got the balance right, but an hour and a half later, something happens.
Crash, it all goes over.
So it's the vessel is got a lot of gears about her that I liken it to the truck driver with 16 or 18 gears, and it's the difference with the load. If they're empty, do they skip a few gears? And then remembering they've got a heavier load rather than a moderate load, so they have to go through every gear.
Yeah. And
it's that business of transitioning from, oh yeah, I have to do that, to you have to do that. And that's a process of time. And so Pride's great from the point of view of learning what she can do, but she's not great from the point of view of teaching, because she's just so hard to describe without doing it and doing it again and again and again. So it's she's not a beginner boat, but she's a great development boat.
Sure.
Professional development, getting to, you do it often enough, and then it starts the patterns start to emerge, and it's respect for the vessel's nature that develops, and with that nature comes all the physics, all the choices, and there's a lot of choices, and some are better than others. It's hard to do something wrong when you're not going to touch something. It's only wrong when you crash into something.
That's objectively. Yeah.
So seamanship, yeah. So what are we looking for? And when it comes to crew, then it comes to handling of the gear.
Yeah.
So there's technique for tacking headsails. We have a technique that we have chosen to use as against it's absolutely necessary, and that is we never let the headsails flog. Never let the headsails flog.
Which is very different than the yachting industry.
Right. They're doing it all the time. And then there's the business of weight control, the main boom, as a for instance. In smooth water here in the harbor, here in the bay, it would be okay to take the quarter tackles off to keep the boom from banging from side to side when it's not being held by other stuff. But if you try to do that when you're at sea, you're motoring on, you went outside of the bay, you're now no wind, so you're motoring along. Now you got a bit of a breeze, but there's also a 3-foot swell. You first take off the quarter tackles before you do anything else. You're going to have this thing bouncing around.
Yeah.
So it's all about the seamanship, about control, management of things. We do that process of not letting go of the quarter tackles or having one quarter tackle against the main sheet all the time.
Yeah.
It's the chief mate, the captain might cheat under
Here
certain circumstances, but the discipline, the ritual discipline is you always go from the main sheet not working and the 2 quarter tackles working and there's no mainsail set to the main sheet and a quarter tackle, and then not the other one. And then at a point when the sail's going up, you make a decision about letting the main sheet have it all by itself, unless you're head to wind. You see, that's different, and versus setting the mainsail after you're underway all the way. You set the mainsail. We often set and strike the mainsail. We're not head to wind. I'd say more than 70% of the time we're setting the main with the wind on the beam somewhere, or even behind us, or taking it down under those circumstances. And so that's where that whole process of when you shift to the boom tackle as well, the preventer boom tackle.
Yeah.
So that's all about management of the undulation factor of the ship with the amount of weight that you're dealing with. And that seamanship is a very much a crew seamanship thing when it comes to headsails, dealing with the foresail, also dealing with setting the square. It's about understanding the geometry so that you can work it in the dark at night.
Yeah.
That's not simply knowing where the line is on the pin rail, and that's important in the dark. It's also understanding what it is so that you understand why the sequence.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on our time here.
Okay.
So we're going to do a second installment talking about crew training and seamanship, and we're going to flesh out some more of these ideas. But before we go, kind of one last question. Is there something that took you a while to figure out on the second boat?
How good a sailor she is. Geometry has never been a problem for me. The business of the balance. But it took me forever to understand where she was fast and where she wasn't fast, because I was just stuck with the fact that I'd been on the old Pride for as much as I had been.
Sure.
And from the point of view of the builders, Peter Bedreau and others who had sailed the old boat, helped build the old boat as well as come back to build the second boat, there was quite a bit of sort of coffee conversation about, yeah, I don't think this one's going to be as fast as the old one.
Sure.
What do I know?
Reduction of sail area versus raising freeboard, and I could see why that would be a thought process.
But hands down, this vessel outperforms scale for scale, circumstances for circumstances, outperforms the old boat, and that was only learned through accumulating time with the boat. Now, I made an error in an assumption when it came to planning. So we always have this formula. The old boat, Armin of Sussex created this formula. We use 100 miles a day, and we then add a day to deal with the fact that we're departing on a partial day and arriving on a partial day.
Yeah.
So 300 miles, 4 days. Goes on and on that way. Well, bigger boat, faster boat. So our coastal rule was I'd set at 130 miles a day. And about a year in, I got a conversation by a board member. Says, Jan, I understand you're doing a lot of motoring. Maybe you ought to slow it out a little bit, to add more time. So I pondered. He was right. I was aware of it. I was trying to figure out what the problem was. I dropped it back to 110 miles a day, which we've used ever since for coastal. And I've come to realize that, yes, the boat's faster, but the wind isn't.
Yeah.
So for every given voyage, what are the likelihood of the wind ranges? There's still going to be more or less the same likelihood. Now, we're talking about the global weather situation, but those are extremes we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so are we getting more calms? It could be. Are we getting stronger strongs? It could be. But in the meanwhile, everything is the same. So we're a fair weather sail vessel. We're a summertime sail vessel. We're, it's between 5 and 15 knots of wind. And yes, we're a more powerful boat, but in the end, the difference between 110 miles a day and 130 miles a day is so significant that we were going from nearly motoring 50% of the time to now we're motoring 30% of the time or less.
Yeah.
And so she far outperforms the old boat. Balance and weatherliness and general speed and light air and moderate, and of course in stronger air it's just a bigger boat, but in lighter air, a very handsome sailor. And the old boat was no slouch.
Yeah.
But this one has that degree of difference of capability. But then there was that humorous point where I was over ambitious about the mission. Not that the mission was driving me, but we're always trying to live to the mission, which is we're a port boat, so you got to keep your transits down.
Yeah.
The other way around, lollygag around when you're
at why sea not? Mission. Add a day, add a week. Doesn't really matter.
So those are the things that I found I can reflect upon, so I smile a little bit to myself. It's, okay, this is what you didn't understand.
We all have those. I just want to thank everybody for joining us this morning. And once again, we are going to do a second installment of crew training and seamanship next Friday. So if you have any questions that relate to any of the topics that we discussed today, please leave them in the comments or comment on future Facebook posts related to Coffee with the Captain. I want to thank everybody who donated this morning. That really helps us out a lot, helps keep Coffee with Captain going. And Captain Miles, do you have any parting words for us?
Remain diligent, everyone. Remain diligent.